A good Erev Shabbos. We don't expect our leaders to be perfect in general, and it's a good thing, because 9 times out of 10, or maybe 99 and 44/100% of the time, we'd be disappointed. So it's good that we don't set the bar at that point. What we do ask of our leaders is humility and dedication. That's our model in Moshe Rabbeinu of Moses throughout the whole Chumash. What we glean from our weekly encounters with chapters of the Jewish people's story, told through Moshe's account and involving him at every step of the way, is not flawlessness, but rather both the sense of purpose of leading the Jewish nation, not just for the sake of leading, but really to take us where we need to be, both geographically and spiritually, and ongoing indicators of being humble. These are the marks of what we look for in a leader. Maybe it would be interesting to compare Moshe's role in our history to Lahavdil Churchill's statement. I think he said, and if I get it wrong, I know Tony will set me right, history will be kind to me. I'm not doing the voice. History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. Let's think for a minute about Moshe's writing history and what that means for him and for us, and more importantly, for the story itself. Remember what we're saying each time we lift up the Torah after we read it. V'zos haTorah asher sam Moshe. This is the Torah that Moshe placed lifnei b'nei Yisrael, before the Jewish people, al pi Hashem, by God's directive, biyad Moshe, in the hand of Moses. Now, we don't say that this very scroll that's housed in KST is the self-same one that Moshe wrote and gave a copy to each tribe, but we do know that it is a faithful copy of that, because all the Sifrei Torah around the world are written the same way, with the same number of letters. There were scholars among us who actually counted the number of letters in the Torah and ensured that the text was faithfully and accurately transmitted generation to generation. And if we find a typo, or really a scribo, like a hey in place of an aleph, we stop right then and there and we take another scroll out and read that until the one that has the error can be corrected. And if we go back even further than that, to the actual recording of events as they happened, before Moshe wrote one Sefer Torah for each tribe, before he passed away at 120 after a full life, we'll see that it's not Moshe's flawless recollection that stands out. Rather, it's that he's absolutely dedicated and absolutely humble in telling us our story. Let's start with humility. God calls Moshe Anav Mikol Adam, way back in Parshas Beha'aloischa, humble among all people, among all men. But we like to see proof. So here's proof. Remember back in Parshas Shemos, when we first met Moshe, and God asked him to go and speak to Pharaoh, Bi Adoni, he said, please, my Lord, lo ish dvarim anochi. I'm not a man of words. Moshe says, Kvad peh, kvad lashon anochi. I'm slow of speech, I'm slow of tongue. You know what he said. We use all these to explain, and the Midrash fills in that maybe he had a speech impediment. Perhaps he had an injury as a child that brought this about, or whatever it was. But look where we are now, in our reading now. Now Moshe has led us for 40 years, out of Egypt, through the sea, to the mountain, across the desert, to the edge of the promised land. And that's just the geography. Spiritually, he's led us from being a nation of slaves, idolaters, standing at the lowest depths of the final gates of impurity, assimilation, disappearance, and he's taken us and fashioned us into a mamleches koyanim, a vagoy kadosh, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation we are. He believed in us, and he made us believe in ourselves. He gave us so much trust and so much self-awareness, we're still here. In short, he had a great career. He'd be tired, you would think, ready to retire, exhausted, drained. So this leader, who to begin with was not a great public speaker and was hesitant of his speaking ability before Paro, protested his inarticulateness, now spends the last 5 weeks of his life telling us the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, Chumash Devarim, our story, and charting for us the course for the chapters in our collective life that will come after he leaves us. What happened to heavy speech and heavy tongue? Where's the stutter now? Now, Moshe is at a very advanced age, full of life, and he has a lot to tell us. In fact, this history, this instruction, this Torah, and this song, by the way, because at the end of the whole book, after everything else is said and done, we'll have Hazinu. Moshe sings us this most beautiful moving, stirring, full poem of our life as a nation. Moshe now has no problem at all talking. So, is he a poor speaker or is he a marathon sermonizer? Sharona's father of blessed memory used to say that the English word for a renowned speaker, orator, actually comes from Yiddish. Oy retter. Boy, can he talk. Our dear Gabbai Luz, Habna Lichting Gan Eden, used to mention every year to me how his grandfather, who was a Rav, would give the Shabbos HaGadol Drasha. Shabbos HaGadol Drasha was meant to be not just insights into the Haggadah or a good story to tell at the Seder, it's all the halachas of Pesach. Everything you need to know about cleaning for Passover and kashering, changing over your dishes, selling the chametz, how to make the Seder, finishing the Afikoman by midnight at the first Seder, all the details in between. So Lou said the Zayda used to speak for a half an hour and then have a glass of tea. Then speak for another half an hour, then another glass of tea. Another half an hour, more tea. Each year the drasha got longer in his retelling. One year was 4 hours, next year was 5 hours. So is this the way Moshe spoke during his last month of life? Did he speak constantly, all the time? He would just take a break for tea to soothe his throat? Maybe he didn't even need that. Or was it just an all-day event each day? Then everyone went home to their tents to sleep, and they showed up the next morning for more. Who knows? If Moshe's ability to speak got broader and deeper as he aged, what about Bnei Yisrael's capacity to listen? Well, maybe if somebody told you this was going to be the last speech by the greatest leader of the Jewish people, you'd definitely buy a ticket and show up early to get a front row seat. So Moshe is humble. He's protesting his inability to put the words together when we see clearly from this book in front of us that he had the gift of speech. The first midrash in the parsha offers a solution, quoting Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, the 15th chapter. It says, Marpe lashon eitz chaim, the tree of life, heals the tongue. Eitz chaim, of course, we say when we put the Torah away each time, Eitz chaim hi lemachazikim ba, it's a tree of life to those who hold on to it. The tree of life is Torah. That's clear to us. This Eitz chaim, this tree of life, Torah, has the power to be marpe lashon. It heals the tongue. So whatever problems Moshe had to overcome in speaking, he overcame them, and he was actually healed, improved, strengthened, helped by speaking words of Torah for all those generations. What would our lives be like if we spoke only words of wisdom like that? How different would it be? It's a good question to ask. The Sfas Emes takes the Midrash and the verse from Mishlei even a step further. He says, why just the tongue? Why are we saying Torah heals only the tongue? Shouldn't it have an effect on the whole person's being? He answers his own question in the affirmative, no surprise, because lashon means the tongue, and it also means language. Eitz chaim, the Torah heals language, meaning it empowers language, explains the Sfas Emes. Moshe spoke to the entire nation here in this book. There was instruction and insight and even some rebuke, but his words which can just as easily hurt as they heal, Moshe's words of Torah spoke to everyone, the entire Bnei Yisrael, even those who were sensitive maybe to rebuke and being chastised. And it touched the hearts and the souls of even those people also. That's a great leader who can speak meaningfully and influentially to everyone, not just his own tribe, not just to the scholars, to the inner circle, but to everyone, even those who maybe don't realize yet how much they need to hear the message. Moshe's devotion to the people, it's beyond question. It's a paradigm, in fact. Way back, Parshas Kitisa, with the golden calf, when Moshe pleaded for forgiveness for us. He told God, take me out of your book if you can't forgive the Bnei Yisrael. Mechenina mesifrecha. Better take my name out of the Torah. And that's a big omission. Moshe's name appears over 700 times in the Torah. Take me out of it, he says to God, if you can't forgive the Yidden. If there's no room in your Torah for forgiveness, there's no room for me either. The Dubno Magid emphasizes Moshe's dedication to the project, drawing on what we said about Moshe's speech. God specifically chose someone who was known to be a poor public speaker, so that it would be clear to everybody that Moshe was the conduit, the channel for God's voice and God's message. There's an interesting tension in calling this book Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the Torah. The scholars of Greek among us will confirm that that's what Deuteronomy means, I think, repetition of the law. It's Moshe reviewing and repeating the law for us, and yet we notice, and we discussed in our Shiurim this week, what strikes us as inconsistencies between the first time things are mentioned and what we see in Deuteronomy. And there are even some halachas we mentioned that are taught only in Deuteronomy. We haven't heard them up to this point, so it's repetition of what exactly? What's happening is that the first 4 books of Torah are transmitted through Moshe as in his being a perfect conduit. Moshe is the spokesman. He's the mouthpiece of God's instruction for Bnei Yisrael. In Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, it shifts to the kind of prophecy that we have in the following succession of prophets. Now the message is enclosed within the intellect of the prophet, in this case Moshe Rabbeinu, who's a flesh and blood person. Doesn't that make it less holy, less godly? Au contraire, it actually makes it more so. It proves what we say in the Gemara, that Torah, lo b'shamayim hi, Torah is not in heaven, or it's not only in heaven. It's not something so lofty, so high up there, so godly, that the human mind cannot grasp it. It's true, we cannot know the essence of God, try though we do, but God's Torah we can grasp, right? With effort, dedication, humility, as Moshe's example shows us. That's its greatness, and also the greatness of the messenger who brought it to us. It is indeed God's communication, but at the end of the day, it's communication with us. It is, as we will read later in the book, Karov Elecha, it's close to us. Beficha uvilvavcha lasaisai, it's within our grasp. It's very close to us, in our mouths and in our hearts, to do it. Not just some lofty book of ideals, but actual guidance and imbuing with holiness every step of the way. Our lives in the desert, in Israel, and even in Toronto, and even during a pandemic. We look to restoration of all good things in the world when they sometimes seem to be eclipsed. This Shabbos of the Haftorah Chazon, the vision of Isaiah, the first chapter of Isaiah, which always comes the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, the most impactful eclipse of good things in our national memory, when our temple was destroyed and we were exiled from our homeland, and all the miseries that proceeded in the 2,000 years that came as direct results of that destruction and exile. And that Torah that Moshe taught us, continues to inspire us with faith and hope and trust that the good will once again be paramount, and it'll be restored, it'll be revealed, and goodness and godliness will have the upper hand in the world. And perhaps most significant, that our actions right now are an important part of bringing about that triumph of light over darkness. May this Shabbat Chazon, this Shabbos of vision, truly bring all of us and Gans Klal Yisrael visions of much better times to come speedily. Good Shabbos.